Whether you are a Thomas Delauer fan or if you've just completely written him off, this will actually completely shift the way that you view him and whether or not you want to put into practice what he preaches. Years ago, back when I first started my fitness transformation, I just started consuming massive amounts of YouTube content. And of some of the biggest names at that time, who else did I end up starting to watch but the one and only Thomas Delauer? So I just started watching video after video, learning and gleaning whatever I thought I could. I even actually started intermittent fasting, partially because of Thomas. But little did I actually know what I was about to discover about him. And even worse yet was how it would actually wreck my motivation. As time went on, I'm consuming more and more of his content, but slowly I'm starting to notice some things. I'm starting to notice some red flags, so to speak. But what do I actually mean by red flags? Well, for starters, I just started to see him present what appeared to be contradictory information. So for example, he would get hyper-focused on one particular way that you needed to be able to break your fast. And so I would start to implement that in my own attempt to try to optimize what I could. But then not long after that, I'd hear him say something that would appear to completely flip that statement on its head. Now, as my own knowledge of what was research-backed and evidence-based actually began to grow, it just became more and more clear to me all of these red flags and what I was seeing. And by this point, it would be red flags like this.
I'm not making this up, this is what he said.
Having belly fat is because you're messing around your sodium levels.
So he says cutting out salt increases aldosterone, and then this makes you store more water and make you look puffy and bloated.
He's saying that's from cutting out salt, not adding more salt.
Okay, I'm sorry. I couldn't help but leave Greg's voice really high-pitched. But wait till you hear this.
So he's literally saying that if you don't have enough salt, you get more puffy and bloating. So like reducing your salt a lot is gonna make you like puffy and bloated. So he then tries to look smart. He reads this word, 11-hydroxysteroid dehydrogenase. If you go on a low salt diet, guaranteed you're gonna start losing weight. Guaranteed. Because guess what? Processed foods are all loaded in salt. This is literally what really happens. When you cut down on salt, your body increases urine output. Not decreases, increases. So if you go on a low sodium diet, you will literally lose more water weight and look not puffy. You will look drier and leaner. Every time I do a photo shoot or a bodybuilding show, or have to cut weight for powerlifting, or coach people to cut weight to make weight for MMA fights, boxing matches, anything, the first thing I do is cut carbs and salt.
But here's where operationalizing the variable comes in, right? This is where we look at things. Operationalizing the variable. What the does that even mean? So this is when people like this put words together and jargon that doesn't actually mean anything, just so they feel like they can sound smart. Okay, because it may not be bad in the glycemic index scale, but it's bad because it is the one that's going to get stored as fat. Because as soon as it's going through digestion, it's dropping into the portal vein and it's going into the liver. Oh wow, this portal vein. Everything goes to the liver from the portal vein, Tommy. Again, he's throwing in something superfluous so he can sound smarter. To the liver, it goes through de novo lipogenesis and it stores as fat, specifically around the liver and around your midsection. It doesn't just cause fat accumulation, it stops what's called beta oxidation. So that means it stops fat burning from occurring at mitochondrial level. So if that was true, we would expect that people who are on a very high fructose diet would have larger deposition of adipose compared to people who are on a low fructose diet when the calories are matched. A recent study fed 150 grams of additional fructose, 150 grams of pure fructose to subjects versus a control group. No difference in body fat levels.
That would give me massive reason to rethink actually listening to him. And even though at that point I didn't actually stop following Thomas Delauer, there was one video that was coming that would absolutely throw me over the edge. It seemed like just a constant barrage of these types of red flags. And it wasn't just me that was actually seeing it. Then started sprouting up all the YouTuber and other experts who began debunking a lot of the claims that Thomas was actually making in his content.
So that is how a high glycemic food can ultimately make you fat later on down the line. But let's talk about the one that you really are interested in. So that's how high glycemic food can make you fat later on down the line. That's not what the researchers concluded in that study. And he just went from like, if we were on a journey from point A to point Z, he went from point A to point B and then just jumped all the way to point Z. You're insulin sensitive after a workout, but then you're also insulin sensitive at the end of the fast. So you're double insulin sensitive, which means that when you do consume your protein, you do consume food, you're going to get a big spike in insulin, which means you're going to get a bigger spike in mTOR, which means you're going to get more protein synthesis at that very minute.
Okay, the big picture here is that because we're fasted, we're more insulin sensitive, and therefore the insulin will have a stronger effect size on mTOR activation. Again, he's not wrong here. You would see greater insulin response in that moment, especially if you're consuming one large meal filled with carbohydrates and proteins. Yet I have to disagree in terms of it being a superior method to consuming protein multiple times throughout the day. In a study investigating this very thing, they tested the consumption of a large amount of protein 1 to 2 times a day against a smaller amount per serving, but 4 to 5 times a day. And then again with a really small amount 10 times a day. And they found that 4 to 5 times a day with a moderate dose of protein was superior to the other two methods for stimulating muscle protein synthesis.
It could be gimmicky, and I could break down and say these are the top 5 worst
You
sugars.
could be gimmicky. Bro, you're the epitome of gimmicky.
That gave me more reason for pause. But most importantly, he would just simply major in the minors.
So when we downregulate that, because we're simultaneously upregulating estrogen, breaking a fast is about being very strategic with at least one relatively small meal. Right when you break a fast, your body is so sensitive. You have to be very wary of what you put in your body at that point.
And it would honestly just get way too complex and it would stress me out. And I remember one of the videos that I was watching where I really started to have this awakening and started to notice this. I'm reading in the comments of people experiencing a very similar thing to what I was experiencing and just being very confused. But because of the complexity, it just turned off a lot of his potential audience. I have a family, I have work, I have kids' activities that are all a priority over my fitness. So the more and more that I saw of these videos, it would honestly just shut me down. It would drive me to a place where I'm like, what's the point of trying? All of the complexity just made it incredibly demotivating. And it's honestly that way for a lot of mom and dads out there because of one massive reason that could actually be destroying your own fitness journey. And now, don't get me wrong, he sounded incredibly knowledgeable. He used a lot of big words.
But here's where operationalizing the variable comes in handy.
When as 11-hydroxysteroid dehydrogenase, they were acting upon the 1,7-estradiol receptor, very, very goitrogenic.
And he always seemed like he had the answers. And on top of that, the guy looks incredible. But it was honestly just too complex for me to try to implement these things in my own life. I mean, at the time, I was a parent of 2 young kids and struggling to just keep up with life. Should have told my future self what was coming. I guess it was kind of my fault. Because though, if it's that complex, it's just not worth it. It just honestly made me feel like it's not possible unless you are that super dialed and keeping things so tweaked and perfect. And if that was the case, then why bother? But unfortunately, it was the straw that broke the camel's back when I saw this ad.
In fact, a medium-sized banana packs nearly 30 grams of carbs and almost 20 of which is sugar. This is comparable to eating a package of Reese's Cups, which weighs in at 20 grams of sugar and actually contains 4 grams less of carbohydrates.
That at that point, I knew that I could not listen to him anymore. This drove me absolutely insane. I wanted to scream at the phone when this ad came up, because at this point I was well established in my own knowledge. And I knew that the best way to actually change people's lives was not about demonizing whole foods or the fructose in fruit, but it was actually by just including more whole foods, whether or not it's a banana. And it was so infuriating that after I had started my own channel, I actually made a response video to this very ad because I hadn't seen anyone out there responding to the nonsense of it. Now, thankfully though, I did find Shredded Sports Science, who did a great rebuttal of that video, so I felt like I wasn't alone. But the funny thing is, little did I know of what would actually come of this later. Now at this point, I completely wrote off Thomas Delauer until this happened. I was just mindlessly scrolling through my feed when this popped up. 2 of the most unlikely people getting together to actually have a conversation. Layne Norton and Thomas Delauer. Now, if you haven't seen Layne Norton, which you probably have, he is very well known for debunking a lot of the myths out there because of his background. And frankly, he's called out Thomas Delauer 1 or 2 times. But as it turned out, this was just the tip of the iceberg, and you will be shocked at what actually happened as a result of this. We started seeing moments like this.
It's okay to change your mind on things, especially when it's based in research and science and peer-reviewed literature. That's how we grow, that's how we evolve, that's the entire point. You can increase your ratio of protein to fat. You're probably wondering what ratio? Don't worry about it. This is really minute details, just trying to explain things so people aren't as confused when they see some conflicting stuff from 5, 6, 7 years ago. I used to think, oh, this breaks a fast, and I used to what I would call major in the minors. It's difficult, and yeah, I mean, I'm guilty of that too. You know, getting excited about a rodent model study and you know, shouting it from the rooftops, right? And I think one of the evolutions that I've made over the last year and a half, especially, is making a very clear notation.
Now, Thomas Delauer, who had at that point since stopped showing up in my feed, started to show up again. I started getting intrigued. I started wondering what was going on. I started wondering, this is unusual. There began to pop up just countless moments of Thomas Delauer changing his mind.
Like, I don't have a problem just saying that this is what works for me and this is what I like. And you know, before I used to preach it as gospel, and now it's a lot more of, hey, I like this. If you want to join me, and I'll share the details of it and we can have some fun with it. But you gotta just test yourself, but take it for what it's worth, because what you test today is probably gonna be different from what you test 3 days from now. And if you wanna drive yourself crazy by trying to figure out everything that's going on, you know, be my guest, I do, and it literally makes me crazy sometimes.
You're eating a lot of fructose, but you're in a deficit. I don't think you're gonna see increases in liver fat. In fact, I think you probably see decreases in liver fat if you're in a deficit.
Yeah, I would probably agree. And a year ago, I probably would have disagreed.
This was a massive shift that honestly had me at the edge of my seat. Here he was, actually changing in real time in front of all of his viewers. But a very important question is just to figure out what actually originally led to Thomas holding this point of view where he was overcomplicating things, majoring in the minors. How did he even get there? And if you know Thomas's story and where he came from, he's made a massive, massive transformation and is insanely passionate about it now and wants to get things even dialed in that much further. If you understand his thought process, then you can clearly understand and see why he came to some of the conclusions that he did.
Yada yada. I'm not trying to push anything. But more importantly than adding keto is I became obsessed with nutrition. What I mean by that is I didn't start just diving into the research full bore at that point. No, I became obsessed with how my body responded to foods, and that's how I fell in love with the process.
If you watch enough of Thomas's content, you're actually gonna very quickly see how he nerds out on all of the quote-unquote mechanisms that actually affect the body.
Consume food, you're going to get a big spike in insulin, which means you're going to get a bigger spike in mTOR, which means you're gonna get more protein synthesis at that very minute. And this has been proven in a study that was published in the journal Nutrients. They found that an increase in insulin correlated with an increase in mammalian target of rapamycin. Okay, this is doing your cardio while you are in a fed state. Yeah, believe it or not, it can cause belly fat to accumulate. It turns out inside our muscles, we have something known as IMTG, intramyocellular triglycerides. These intramyocellular triglycerides are fats that are in our muscles. What they did is they measured their intramyocellular triglyceride levels at the beginning of the study and then at the end. Well, they found the group that did their cardio in a fasted state burned through 3 times as much of the fat stored in the muscle than the other groups. Fasted cardio makes a big difference. If you do fed cardio, it can alter hormones and make it so you ultimately end up storing belly fat.
Performing cardio in a fed state, he says, makes you fat in the stomach. So if I add cardio, but if I ate first, it makes me fatter.
And unfortunately, this is also really the reason why he gained the title of being a study cherry picker, because he'd find one study that would indicate something very unusual or unique or apply to his own way of thinking and use that as support for his position. Oftentimes there were one study in particular that showed some sort of novel discovery, or so it seemed. But how could he actually get caught up in sensationalizing these when there's a much better way to actually interpret these mechanisms?
Am I incorrect? Is that does that make sense?
You're kind of taking it from the mechanistic perspective, and I kind of take
Totally.
it from a little bit more of a 10,000 foot approach, I guess the best way to describe it.
Which is the better way to do it, candidly.
I can make any nutrient seem anti-longevity if I just look at its acute effects. Carbohydrates increase insulin. That's bad for longevity. Insulin activates mTOR. It activates all these different kinases that are anti-longevity. But what about fats? Well, fats can decrease flow-mediated dilation. That's bad for heart disease. And I can even do that with vegetables. Like Paul Saldino does that with vegetables. There's this toxin in broccoli. And it's like, yeah, about 10,000 times less the dose that it would need to be toxic. You can pick an isolated thing and make it seem scary through its acute effects. But the bigger question is, what does the broad data say?
So I mean, what even is a mechanism? Well, I Googled it for you. And so simply put, certain things that happen in our body that trigger other things. And mechanisms are massively important to our body, obviously, because we're full of them. But what's interesting about our bodies is that even along with these mechanisms, there's 1,000 or so other variables that are going to be input into this equation that affect the way our bodies actually function. So a mechanism that produces one output may not actually produce that output if you zoom out. So do you see how we can actually look at the impact of mechanisms in different ways? And Thomas loves to focus in on these.
Overall, I think Thomas Delauer gets carried away with the mechanisms, which is something I see often with people who get caught up in the excitement of shock value. I don't know if that's what's happening here, but we have to prove these claims through human trials before we look to mechanisms for why the results are the way that they are. As we saw, the claims sounded true when looking at the microscopic mechanisms within the cells like insulin, mTOR, lipoprotein lipase, and so on, but the studies taking a macroscopic look show the reality of the situation.
But man, this just is something that's never going to go away in this industry, which is people putting importance, and a lot of importance, on these little things that do not matter. And the problem is, it can control your life. Can you imagine thinking, well, I'm really trying to do this intermittent fasting thing right, so no, I can't work out later. I have to work out fasted. No, I can't make these plans. I have to work out fasted. And when I'm done my workout, I need to have a 50% ratio of glucose and fructose. No, I can't eat that meal with you after. I need to get my 50% ratio of glucose and fructose, and I need exactly 3 grams of omega-3.
Because this is where he sees, so to speak, the devil in the details. But at the same time, we've got to remember that we're talking about the whole of the human body and not just how one particular mechanism will affect a certain outcome, whether it be muscle building, fat loss, or whatever it might be. Well, we can see his passion coming through in a lot of ways, and he clearly, like I said, nerds out a lot of this stuff. He's constantly looking at the way different mechanisms will impact the body and that slight edge that it could give someone to actually optimize their fitness. But even after putting out all of this content in the past, we still kept seeing him more and more putting out new videos showing how his position kept shifting.
It's okay to change your mind on things, especially when it's based in research and science and peer-reviewed literature.
And honestly, like, I think one of the things I really respect about you is you did change your mind on things. Like, that's so rare. Like, so few people are actually willing to do that.
What's amazing is he's got an incredible fascination and interest in how the body works.
And if you want to drive yourself crazy by trying to figure out everything that's going on, you know, be my guest. I do, and it literally makes me crazy sometimes.
And because he actually nerds out on all of this stuff, it really led him down a path of hyper-focusing and getting way too mixed up in the details, for good or for ill. It's a gift, but it's also a curse. He has a strength of actually dissecting the pieces of information in an attempt to provide crazy optimization for people. But I would argue that in doing so, he actually lost a lot of his audience, me being one of them. But because I was willing to actually understand, it led me to do something that I never thought I would do. Now remember, Thomas doesn't apologize for the fact that he still nerds out on all of the complexity of nutrition and the mechanistic studies, nor does he really need to. But he has really learned to shift his perspective and to understand places where he might have been wrong or where he might need to be open to a new way of thinking. And he's gotten insanely curious and had conversations with people that I never would have thought he would have had a conversation with. What's fascinating is he's also even gone to the point of doing this.
I've tried to come a long way with my brand and start looking at things from a different angle and understanding that, you know, perhaps earlier in my career I was more a little too cavalier, you know, understanding the biochemistry to a certain degree and making my own kind of claims from it. And I've actually even deleted videos that I think don't align with where I stand today.
Thomas is willing to actually admit he was wrong, and honestly that he was too focused on things that specifically worked really well for him. But what you can be certain of about Thomas Delauer is this. We are seeing something that you will rarely ever see. He admitted he was wrong in front of millions and millions of subscribers. He changed his mind. He's open to actually having conversations with people he may disagree with, which actually leads me to what I'm shocked that I'm about to do. I'm going to recommend that you start listening to Thomas Delauer if you aren't already. Remember though, you don't have to agree with everything that Thomas is saying, and neither do I. But the really cool thing is that he brings in all sides on a topic and is willing to have the conversation. He's willing to actually say he was wrong. But don't miss this, because most important of all, he now actually says this about bananas. Almost makes me feel like I should actually unlist my video of him. But what's absolutely fascinating is where this hyper-complex path actually led Thomas compared to the shocking transformation that this massive YouTuber actually made starting down the same path. But much quicker than Thomas actually realized that he needed a different approach. And it's actually the faster way to get the body that you've dreamed up that you're looking for. And as always, be intentional, bring the intensity, and I'll see you on the next video.